Hello people, Assalamualaikum. So I would like to share this presentation in addition to our discussion about conflict management. So the specific topic of this conflict management is all about arguing is usually a battlefield for a bigger issue. So the first is we have to define the so-called conflict. So you know very well and you have already a lot of ideas when you talk about conflict. And this is just a sort of review. So conflict, a battle, a contest, or opposing forces existing between primitive desires and moral, religious, or ethical ideas. That's according to Mr. Webster or Webster Dictionary. Then it is also a state of incompatibility of ideas between two or more parties or individuals. Then another definition, conflict is an expressed struggle between at least two interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference with others in achieving their goals. That's according to the study of Wilmot and Hucker in 1998. Then another is conflict exists when incompatible activities occur. Then when you talk about conflict management, this is the practice of identifying or handling conflict in a sensible, fair, and efficient manner. And I think I had already also sent you about some readings regarding this conflict management. We have the so-called functional as well as dysfunctional conflict. Then what about this functional conflict? Functional conflict contributes to the achievement of the goals of the group or the organization. Then functional conflict should be nurtured if not encouraged. So this is something good. The functional conflict, once again, should be nurtured if not encouraged. Then what about this dysfunctional conflict? Impedes the organization from accomplishing its goals. Then dysfunctional conflict should be reduced or removed. So yan. Then there are philosophies of conflict management. So the first is traditional philosophy. All conflict are negative and potentially destructive for the organization. Then conflict should be eliminated. That's the traditional point of view when we talk about conflict. It's really negative. Then when it comes to behavioral philosophy, conflict is inevitable in organizations and should be accepted as part of organizational life. So this definition, medyo okay siya because it should be accepted as part of organizational life. Then to continue, we have the interactionist philosophy. For this philosophy, conflict is essential to the survival of the organization. So therefore, when you talk about conflict is just part and parcel of an organization. Then conflict should not only be accepted but encouraged in organizations. Then effective conflict management should includes both stimulations and reductions of conflict. Then conflict management is a major responsibility of the manager. Kaya nga, from the readings that I gave to you, so in order not to escalate, it's up to the manager or how to manage the so-called conflict. Then there are myths or misconceptions about conflict. The first myth is harmony is normal and conflict is abnormal. I think that's self-explanatory. Then conflicts is a result of personal differences. That's another myth. Then conflict and disagreements are the same. So once again, another myth or misconception, conflict and disagreements are the same. There are a lot of causes of conflict. In this presentation, the first is personal differences, then informational deficiency, the role in compatibility, then we have also the environmental stress, the scarcity, and the uncertainty. So that's the causes. Then there are types, of course, of conflict. And maybe these types or the causes of conflict, babalik yan sa inyong mga reports, okay lang. At least you are bombarded with this conflict because of our subject. So the first type is the interpersonal and the intrapersonal, then the intergroup as well as the intragroup, then competitive and disruptive. What about this conflict of ideas? According to Dowley and Frexel in their research in 1999, found that conflict of ideas at the early stage of decision making or in idea formulation was desirable. Then that the same conflict sometimes caused problems at the later stage when the ideas actually had to be implemented. Then we have the so-called conflict of feelings, which is sometimes called personality conflict. Now, you look at this diagram when you talk about these types, the opposition and support. Avoid turning ideas, opponents into personal opponents. Then down in the other side is the personal supporter. We have also the personal opponent. Then down, the idea supporter and the idea opponent. Then look at the 4 square there or rectangle. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, dalawang plus yan. Then the 2 positive and the negative. The 3 negative and positive. Then the 4 negative to negative. The arrow is going to the idea of the opponent. On the other side naman, to number 3, negative and positive, the idea of the supporter. Then, yung pataas, the personal supporter as well as the personal opponent. 1, positive, positive, then 3, negative, positive. So, parang mathematics lang. So, what about the process of the so-called conflict? The perceived conflict, the first, look at the arrow, then going to the felt conflict, then vice versa, bumabalik sa perceived conflict. Then we have the antecedent conditions. So paikot-ikot ang arrow. Then the perceived, the felt conflict, there is a manifestation, the manifest behavior. Then pababa, there is a conflict resolution or the suppression. Then we have the resolution aftermath. There are stages of the so-called conflict. The latent conflict or the source of conflict. In the second stage, we have the perceived conflict. The third, the felt conflict. The fourth, the manifest conflict. Then the conflict aftermath. So going back, so nandoon yan. In the process, nandoon din. Then the stages, ganon din. Then according to Pondy's stages, Pondy as a researcher, what about this latent conflict? There is no actual conflict. However, the potential for conflict to arise is present because of the sources of conflict previously identified. So that's a latent conflict. What about the perceived conflict? Each party searches for the origins of conflict, defines why conflict is emerging, analyzes the events that led to its occurrence, and constructs a scenario that accounts for the problem it is experiencing with other parties. So, nandyan na yung conflict. Hinahanap lang yung ina-analyze, paano nag-i-emerge. So, nandyan na. Then, what about the felt conflict? The next stage. The parties in conflict develop negative feelings about each other. Kaya nga, felt conflict. Then, pababa, another stage is the manifest conflict. One party decides how to react or to deal with the party that it sees as a source of conflict. And both parties try to hurt each other and thwart each other's goals. Medyo malala na. There is already a manifestation of the conflict. Then the conflict aftermath. Every conflict episode leaves a conflict aftermath that affects the way both parties perceive and respond to a future conflict episode. So those are the kinds of or the stages according to Pondy when we talk about conflict. Then we have also the so-called unresolved conflict is a vicious cycle. So you look at that one, the drawing, parang coronavirus. Playing games, if it were not for you, look how hard I have tried. Then sa pababa, destroyed the problem-solving process. On the other side, the relationship degenerates into the power struggle, then develops ritual impasse, stuck at the same point, refusing to talk after working so hard. Then in the end, the relationship fails because neither person's needs are met. So parang coronavirus yung unresolved conflict with that cycle, with that look at the drawing. Then how to deal with the so-called conflict? The interpersonal dynamic. What about this? Are the give and take behavior between people during human relations. Then interpersonal dynamics grow increasingly complex as more people interact. So that's why interpersonal. The more people that will interact, so mag-i-increase, mag-grow yung tinatawag nating dynamics. Then there are key topics of interpersonal dynamics. We have the transactional analysis, assertiveness, and the conflict management. If you still remember before when we took up psychology, when we were still in college, or even today or in your readings about this transactional analysis. What about this transactional analysis? So the TA or the transactional analysis, this is a method for determining how people interact. Kaya nga, transaction. This is the method how people interact. Then when we interact, behavior can be passive. That can be, and that's true. According to psychology, it can be aggressive or it can be assertive. Then performance is greater with this behavior. Maybe in our own experience, when we interact others, in a group, there are passive, there are also aggressive, and of course, there are assertives. So it depends to the behavior of that individual. But once again, when we talk about this transactional analysis, this is a method how we interact people. Then this is a method of understanding behavior in interpersonal dynamics. Take note, the transactional analysis is a method of understanding behavior in interpersonal dynamics. Then in a transactional analysis, we have the so-called the ego states. Ego, I think are familiar. Then according to psychology, each one of us, we have the ego. The major ego states that affects our behavior or the way we transact through communication. We have the so-called, within us as individual, we have the so-called the parent ego, the ego state, it represents the P. critical parent, sympathetic parent. Then we have also the child ego state, which represents the letter C, the natural child, and the adopted child. Then the adult ego state represents letter A. So that's within us. When we deal with this, our relationship, when we transact or when we interact to other people, remember this ego in which each one of us, meron tayo dyan, the parent ego, the child, as well as the adult. So paano kaya ito mag-work? So the transactional analysis, there are types of transactions within ego states. There are 3 different types of transactions. So yan, paano mag-work? It can be complementary, cross transaction, or ulterior transaction. So what about this complementary, cross, as well as ulterior transaction in our interaction with others using our ego states? You look at this one. The complementary transaction occur when the sender of the message gets the intended response from the receiver, generally result in a more effective communication. Then, if you look at the arrow, yung arrow na yan, the parent ego, pupunta siya sa child ego. Then, if you are the superior or the supervisor, so of course, you act as a parent. That's your ego because that's part of your parang description. So, tingin mo sa employee mo, parang mga anak lang. Then likewise, this employee, in return, maroon siyang pananaw being the parent ego. So, you look at now the interaction between the child as employee as well as the parent, the supervisor, or the boss. So, you look at the interaction. So, that's complementary. Kasi dalawa sila nag-i-interact. Okay. What about the cross? Okay, you look at the cross transaction. Occur with the sender of the message does not get the expected response from the receiver. And this result in surprise, disappointment, and hurt feelings for the sender of the message. You look at that one. As a leader or superior, your parent ego, nandoon na natili siya, but the employee, the child ego, anong tingin niya doon sa kanyang supervisor? Then on the other side, the supervisor, since he has the so-called the child ego, ano namang pananaw niya doon sa child ego of the employee or yung the subordinate niya? So, nagko-cross ang kanilang landas. Kaya nga, hindi nagkakasundo. Okay, that's the cross transaction. The result in surprise, maybe disappointment, or hurt feelings for the sender of the message. Kasi para nagka-cross ang kanilang landas. So, once again, the cross transaction occur when the sender of the message does not get the expected response from the receiver. In this case, sino bang receiver? Of course, the employee. Pero, hindi nakita doon sa kanyang supervisor, sa superior. So, ang nakita niya doon sa baba, ano ba ito? So, nagpakumbaba din siya. So, nagko-cross ang kanilang landas. Then, what about these ulterior transactions? Occur when the words seem to be coming from one ego state, but in reality, the words of behaviors are coming from another. Then sometimes when people don't know what they want or how to ask for it in a direct way, they resort to ulterior transactions. Best to avoid ulterior transactions because they tend to waste time. Kaya ulterior. Tingnan natin. The transactional analysis look at the life's position. Attitude towards oneself. It can be positive, it can be negative. Then attitude towards others, sa baba tina, it can be negative, it can be positive. So, the 4 boxes there, tingnan nyo. I'm okay, the first box. You're not okay. On the other side, sa positive, I'm okay, you're okay. But on the negative side, I'm not okay, you are not okay. Then to the other side, I'm not okay, you are okay. Take note to that life position when you talk about transactional analysis. So this is more on the attitude of oneself as well as to others. Then in our real life situation, ganon din tayo. There are times na, especially in our transaction and our interaction to other people, there is positive, there is negative. I'm okay, you are not okay. I'm okay, you are okay. Then I am not okay, you are not also okay. Pareho lang tayo. Then I am not okay and you are okay. So that's in reality in the life's position when we talk about our attitude towards ourselves as well as to others. Now, we have the so-called stroking when we talk about transactional analysis. Stroking, any behavior that implies recognition of another's presence. I think that's self-explanatory. Then there's positive, make people feel good about themselves. Kahit na hindi stroking, kahit itap mo lang yan sa likod. Okay? Then the negative can hurt people in some way. But stroking, you look at this one, behavior that implies recognition of others' presence. So, tandaan natin yon. Then, it can be positive or negative. Pag dinedma mo yon, that's negative. Pag inappreciate mo yon, nirecognize mo yon, that's positive. Negative pag nasaktan siya. Then, giving praise is also known as the positive stroking. Wow, kagaling mo bata. Wow, talented ka bata. So this is a powerful motivation technique. That's why in our transaction, in our reaction with others, especially to your subordinate or subordinate, ganda din yung stroking, especially itong the positive one as well as yung giving praise or the positive stroking. Hindi naman binubola, but people or an individual, there is also a need for us to be recognized. And I think yung may kay Pavlov's yung parang pyramid, if you still remember, kailangan natin yung recognition, kailangan yung appreciation from others. And that's more on the positive stroking. Then what about this assertiveness? So this is the process of expressing thoughts and feelings while asking for what wants in an appropriate way. So once again, this is a process of expressing thoughts and feelings while asking for what one wants in an appropriate way. So ang ganda naman ang ginagawa. Then, present your message without falling into a trap of being too pushy, very aggressive, may mga ganun ha. Then, not tough enough or non-assertive or passive. Kasi may mga tao din dyan. Then, is becoming more global, itong assertiveness. So, it's good to assert, to express the thoughts and feelings. Kung ano talagang gusto mo. Pero sa magandang bagay na pagkasabi. Hindi naman too pushy or aggressive, not tough enough or non-assertive. So, sabi nga, is becoming more global itong assertiveness. Then, behaviors when dealing with the diversity of people. And there are another 4 boxes. So, alam natin, the individual differences, that each one of us is unique. Kaya nga, we are diverse. So, the behaviors in dealing with this diversity of people, we have the so-called passive behavior, we have the aggressive behavior, then the passive-aggressive behavior, and the assertive behavior. So, kung tayong pagpipilian dyan sa 4 na box, saan kaya dyan ang mas maganda? especially in dealing with the diversity of people. Aggressive, assertive, passive-assertive, so a combination, or a passive. Pag passive ka din, para wala ka ding mapala. Aggressive, medyo okay konti, pero hindi lang yung more on the negative. Assertive as okay. So pag combination, passive-aggressive, pwede naman siguro, it depends to the situation. Now, the passive, assertive, and aggressive. If you are the speaker, we are the speakers. So we have the passive speakers, take note. Use self-limiting qualifying expression without stating their position or needs. Kung baga, pahambol-hambol. It can be the false humility. That's a passive speaker. So what about assertive? State their position, needs without violating the right of others. Okay lang din. Diba? Lahat siguro nagiging speakers na tayo. Yan, minsan pahambog tayo sa position. Si Joe Arts, program head sa Graduate College Peace and Development. Ganito sa leaders siya ng ganito. But needs without violating the rights of others. So it can be good, yung assertive. Hindi ang passive naman, parang pahambol effect ka. Then what about the aggressive speakers? State their position, needs while violating the rights of others using the you messages and the absolutes. Ito naman, pahambog na talaga ito. Itong the aggressive speakers na ako nang magaling, ako na lahat. Kayo, wala kayo sa akin kasi ako lang. Very aggressive. So, medyo may problema din dyan. Then, what is my conflict style, your conflict style? Sige. Conflict style, not only is it important to know what relationship or situation is causing conflict in our life, but it is also important to look at how we normally resolve conflict, our natural inclination. So it's up to us. If you have conflict, it's up to us how to resolve that conflict we normally resolve, especially in our family. Kung paano natin resolve. Nag-away ka sa asawa ninyo, away ang mga anak, paano na-resolve yung conflict. Then, we must then decide whether we are satisfied with our current approach, or if we would like to change it in some way to improve our effectiveness at conflict resolution. So, pagkita mo medyo satisfied ka, go for it. Okay? Then, improve siguro for effective and conflict resolution. Then the self-style explanation, as you discover through the conflict resolution assessment, our natural inclination usually place us into one of these styles. Okay. Itong mga styles na ito, surely babalik din to sa mga report ninyo. And sabi ka, we will be bombarded on these styles. Avoiding, accommodating, compromising, competing, as well as collaborating. What about this avoiding style? Take note. If I ignore the problem, it will go away. If I confront the problem, I may not hurt someone's feelings. So, kaya nga negative siya kasi ina-avoid, ayaw mo ma-resolve. What about accommodating? This is positive, then negative. Sa avoiding kasi, in the mind of Stephen Covey, yung negative parang the lost situation. Dito na sa accommodating, the lost-win situation. It is easier to just give in and give them what they want. That's kasi accommodating. Then you'll be better like if you just agree. Then by letting the other person win this time, you will win next time. And you have to pick your battles. Kaya nga, the win-loss situation. Avoiding the loss-loss situation, ito the win-loss situation. What about another style? Compromising. It's only fair because then neither of us get what we want. Then both parties are on an even playing field, then we can choose to give up something we really don't need, thereby winning. Pero compromising, negative pa man din. Ibig sabihin, the lost situation pa rin siya in the mind of Covey. What about competing? Competing is more on the win and the loss situation. I am right and you are wrong. There is only one solution kasi that's competing. And what about collaborating style? Medyo maganda ito. We can find solutions that works for both of us. Okay? The win-win solution. By asking other person's perspective, I can understand them. Then, once we find a common ground, we can work from there. So, collaboration, that's a win-win style. Okay? Positive. So, once again, I told you na pabalik-balik lang ito, especially sa mga report natin about the styles. Then, if you find yourself adopting a conflict style that you are not happy about, anong gagawin? Analyze why you have adopted the style. Then, develop some simple action steps that will help you break your habit. Then, read on for helpful tips that will guide you through various conflict situations. So, if you find yourself adopting a conflict style na hindi ka naman happy, so ito yung dapat na mangyari at gagawin. Then, in the summary of the conflict management style, we have the so-called forcing conflict style. User attempts to resolve conflict by using aggressive behavior. Sa avoiding style, user attempts passively ignore the conflict rather than resolve it. Then, in the accommodating conflict style, user attempts to resolve conflict by passively giving in to the other party. Then, in the compromising conflict style, the user attempts to resolve conflict through assertive and give and take concessions. Then, the last one, the collaborating conflict styles, users assertively attempts to jointly resolve the conflict with the best solution agreeable to all parties. So this is more on the problem-solving styles, which what we call is the win-win solution, according to Stephen Covey in his book, The Highly Effective People, The 7 Habits of the Highly Effective People. So you look at the drawing, bumabalik yung mga diagram there. In the conflict management style, the passive behavior, I'm not okay, you are okay. On the other side, I'm okay, you are okay, that's assertive. Then with high concern for others' needs, you look at the 5 styles there: accommodating, collaborating, compromising, avoiding, and forcing style. Then in the aggressive behavior, I'm okay, you're not okay. Then on the other side, the low concern of others' own needs, I'm not okay, you are not okay. That's low. Sa kabila naman, high concern for others' needs, I'm okay, you are not okay. So, kanina iniisa-isa, ngayon parang kinumbine. So, that's all the styles. Then, there are roles in conflict resolution. We have the initiator, the responder, the mediator. In your research, I think there is the roles, I assigned roles of conflict management or resolution. Kung sino man yung na-assign siguro. Aside from this, mayroon din. Siguro isasan ko lang kung later kung sino yung na-assign dito. But here in this context, there are also roles. The initiator, the responder, as well as the mediator. In initiating conflict resolution, the first step is plan to maintain ownership of the problem using the X and Y model. What about this X and Y model? I think you had already encountered this one. before kasi alam ko masterman kayo in dealing conflict. Then implement your plan persistently. That's step 2. Then the step 3, make an agreement for change. That's more on initiating conflict resolution. So being initiator. Then this XYZ model describes the problem in terms of the behavior, the consequences, and feelings. When you do X as behavior, then Y, the consequence, happens that I have Z as the feelings. So this model, the X, the behavior, the Y, the consequences, then the Z is the feelings. That's all about the XYZ model. Then responding to the conflict resolution. So being a responder, what you are going to do first, listen to and paraphrase the problem using the XYZ model. So once again, the XYZ model, yan, the consequence, the behavior, and the feelings. The X is the behavior, the consequence is the Y, then the happens, and I have Z, the feelings. So the second step, being a responder, you have to agree with some aspects of the complaint. So if you are the responder, then ask for or give an alternative solutions. So if it is, you have an alternative, so you have options. Ano kaya kung ganitong gawin ninyo? Okay, so may dalawang pagpipilian, may mga alternatives. Then the last step is make an agreement for change. That is the roles of being a responder. Then being the mediator or mediating in the conflict, there are also steps. 1. Have each party state his or her complaint using the consequence, the feelings, or the so-called the XYZ model. So once again, tinatawag nating the XYZ model, the behavior, the consequences, as well as the feelings. Then, agree on the problems. That's step 2 if you are the mediator. Then the third, you have also to develop an alternative solutions. So sabi ko nga, pag alternative solutions, may pagpipilian sila so that both parties, yung sabi natin win-win, they would agree. Then the next is make an agreement for change. Then there is also a need to follow up if you are the mediator when you talk about conflict resolution. Now, your personality and interpersonal dynamics. People with the same personality type tend to get along better and have less conflict than those with different personality style. I think this is true and you would agree with this. Pare-pareho yung style ninyo, pare-pareho yung frequency ninyo, pare-pareho yung vibes ninyo, so less yung conflict than those na magkaiba yung personality types nila. Then, if you have a high urgency personality, tingnan nyo, if you have a high urgency personality, what's your use of critical parent ego state? Parent ego state ha, so in your ego as a parent, yung sinabi natin, we have the parent, we have the child, and we have the adult. Okay? Then, be sure to give lots of positive strokes. And it should be, kanina, yung positive stroking, alam natin yun, to help human relations. Then, be careful not to use aggressive behavior to get what you want. So, that's more on your personality as well as the interpersonal dynamics. Then, if you have a high agreeableness personality, you tend to get along well with others. So, maganda ito. Then, be careful not to use the sympathetic parent ego state. What about this sympathetic? What's the difference between sympathy as well as apathy? So sabi nga, be careful not to use the sympathetic parent ego. And what does it mean? Pag sympathetic parent ego, sympathize ka kaagad, na dapat matuto din yung hindi agad-agad. Kaya nga, be careful not to use this. Then, what's an appropriate use of the child ego state? So, yung within us, sabi natin kanina, we have the child ego state. Tingnan din natin kung paano natin gamitin ito in our interaction with others. Now, what about adjustment? Adjustment is about how well you deal with your emotions, especially anger. Kaya nga kailangan, sabi nga, sa mga taong marahas magsalita, sa mga taong bully-bully, mas maganda ikaw nang mag-a-adjust kasi ikaw nang nakakaalam. Kaya nga, how well you deal with your emotions. Pero pag may ganito, may mga hambog ka na mga nakaharap, tapatan mo rin sa pagkahambog mo, the adjustment, wala na. Kaya nga, especially yung anger, may problema tayo sa anger, hindi natin na-manage. And I think, especially the police officers here, we have the subject, I think all of us, we have the subject of the so-called anger management, o how we manage the so-called anger. Kaya nga, sinasabi, balik tayo na kailangan yung adjustment on how well you deal with our or your emotions. Then there are relationship between adjustment as well as openness to experience. If you are not well adjusted, you are probably not open to experience. Ayan. Kaya nga adjustment kailangan talaga. Then if you are not high conscientious personality, if you are a high conscientious personality, you can still transact from the parent ego or the child ego. Conscientious personality. Ano to? Medyo malalim, no? But psychology, nadaanan na rin natin ito. Sabi nga, you can still transact from the parent ego na nasa atin as well as the child ego. So, pwede in our dealings with others. Then, in determining the levels of conflict in our life or in my life, paano? At times, you may sense conflict at work, but not how exactly, but not know how exactly why. And I think may report tayo dito, dealing conflicts in a workplace, may enhance yan. Then the conflict self-assessment will help you to pinpoint the specific area in which you are experiencing conflict so that you can begin to resolve it. Then the areas addressed are the superiors, then the self, the peers, the employees, as well as the productivity, even in your organization as police officers or mga teachers or whatever is your organization, we also need that productivity. Now, may mga something to reflect. Then, do you ever use extreme or rational tactics to gain your point? Slamming doors, stomping around, so ikaw na makakasagot yan. Then, do you use hurt remarks to have the last word, sarcasm, or name-calling? Then, do you ever use a silent treatment? Do you ever withdraw to a self-distance because you do not like to argue? Then, do you ever store up grudges and use later or the revenge? Then, do you ever use my way or your way or no way attitude? Get angry, criticize, or some other aggressive behaviors? Then, do you ever use give in, I guess you are right, submissive behavior to avoid conflict? Then, do you ever use or deny or pretend that everything is okay? So if your answer is yes to any of the above, you are not fighting fair. You are creating an interaction pattern of I win, you lose. So, yun yung sinabi ko. Kung mayroon kang ganon, kung karamihan, yes ang ginawa mo. But our intentions here, especially in conflict resolution, conflict management, and conflict transformation, I win, you win. Not yung I win, you lose. So, based from those guide questions there. Kaya nga, hindi lang tayo palaging mag-yes. Titingnan din natin. Then we have the so-called one-to-one conflict. If you want to constructively resolve conflict with another person, first thing to do is get into the right frame of mind for a positive discussion, then always remembering to treat the other person with respect. So the bottom line there is treat other person with respect. So right frame of mind, that's the first thing to do. Second, agree on the best time and place for both of you to discuss the conflict with each other. Third, set some ground rules. Bakit may ground rules? Kasi para may order. Okay? Then, the fourth is have discussion. This is more on the one-to-one conflict. So, yan ha, the four things to do. Then, step 1, adopt the right frame of mind, yung sinabi natin kanina. So, isip-isip ka na dapat nasa right mind ka. Then, the approach. When you're ready to approach the other person, remember to go in with the right attitude, send a positive nonverbal signals, then focus on the real issues. Pay attention to communication style. Kaya nga may topic din tayo about communication, the effective communication and resolving conflict. Then your attitude, we have the so-called leave behind or take with you. Leave behind your desire to win, punish, or control. On the other side, willingness to work at this. Then, your desire that everything be fair, then an understanding that perception is reality, both for you and those around you. Then, your assumption that it won't work, on the other side, take with you a willingness to learn from the situation. Then, your tendency to think the black and white or right or wrong, and your determination to be right, then on the other side, you have to take with you the willingness to see and acknowledge your own contribution to the problem. And with that, you have to take with you, bravo yan, papalakpakan ka. And what you leave behind, dapat drop dead yan, kasi kailangan yun. Dito ka, you have to take with you when you talk about my attitude as well as your attitude. Then beware of the nonverbal signals. So, there are studies. So, take note ha, especially kayo or tayo. Be aware of our nonverbal signals. Other impression of you is based on, according to study, 7% of the words used, only 7% of the words we use. Then, 38% on the voice quality. By the way, this is according to study. And 55% on nonverbal communication. So, take note on the nonverbal communication. That includes your facial expression and the body languages. Malaking na idudulot yan. Okay? Kasi pag nakita yun sa kabila, oy, plastic lang man ito, oy, ganito. Makikita talaga yan, especially to the non-verbal communication. Then focus on the underlying issues. What happened? Difference in the expectation. What did I expect to happen? What actually is happening? Then who did what? Then the intention, inventory, who meant what? So that's the first. Then the feelings, don't ignore or fail to acknowledge. Then feelings make relationship enjoyable and difficult conversation difficult. Can't have one without the other. Then when we talk about identity, we must face ourselves as well as other person. Am I competent? Or am I a good person? Or am I worthy of love? That's more on how to focus on the underlying issues. Then there are tips when we talk about communication. And this is in addition kung sino yung na-assign sa effective communication. First, we have to avoid you statements. Kasi turo-turo kasi niyan, you. Ikaw, ikaw, ikaw. Then, focus on the behavior, not the employee. Especially yung mga subordinate natin na sa baba ninyo. Then, focus on actions, not the intent. Okay? Then, describe the unspecific. Then, bring the data. Then, practice active listening skills. Kaya nga, listening is the beginning of understanding. Then, ask open and close question to clarify points. So, yun yung communication tips. Then, step 2, consider time factors. So, it's very important itong time. Be timely. Talk to the other person while the issues are still current. Kaya nga, may ibang kasabihan din yan. Take action while the iron is still hot. When the momentum nandyan pa, tuloy-tuloy. Kagaya sa inyo, from masteral, naghanap lang ng momentum, ngayon ituloy-tuloy na. Okay? Then, anger and negative feelings tend to foster if not dealt with quickly. Then, consider the person's time needs. Don't interrupt the other person's schedule and state that you need to talk. So, tingnan mo siya. Kailangan ito, pero hayaan mo kung ano bakante niya. Then, agree on the time to meet with the other person and inform him or her of the topic. Kung ano yung dapat pag-usapan ninyo, then give him or her time to prepare mentally. Huwag yung madalian. Hayaan mo muna kung nag-isip. Bakit hindi ka magsalita? Hayaan lang muna. Kaya baka nag-isip pa. Give time to prepare mentally. Then the 3, set some ground rules. So remember that the golden rules. Everyone tells it like they see. Then, get everything on the table. Ito yung mga ground rules ha. Then, focus on the future. Some samples for discussion, the rules of discussion. In addition to the general rules, it is helpful to agree on how you will talk with each other. No interruptions, walang sigawan, walang time limit on a certain topics of discussion, words to avoid kung ano yon, then the agreement on what to do if you can't agree ahead of time. Step 4 is the actual discussion. In the actual conversation, you have to define the conflict, communicate understanding, explore alternative solutions, agree on the most workable solution, then evaluate after time. Then define the conflict. In defining conflict, describe the problem in clear, concrete terms. So be specific. Use the I and not you, sabi natin kanina. Focus on the behaviors of problems, not the people. Talk about the impact on you. Then define the conflict as a problem to solve together, not a battle to be won. Then second, the communicate understanding. Listen to really understand other person's feelings, needs, and reflect back. Explain how you see the problem after you have heard. Identify your contribution to the situation, then describe feelings, not judgment or accusation. Then talk about identity issues. Third, in exploring the alternative solutions, take turns offering alternative solutions. Then you have to list them all. Then be non-judgmental of others' ideas. Kaya nga, bawal ang judgmental. Then examine the consequence of each solution. Then think and talk positively. Fourth, agree on the most workable solutions. Agree on the solutions you both understand and can live with. Then be committed to resolving the conflict. Then evaluate after time, get together after some time, and see how the new arrangement is working for both parties. Then there are tips in a difficult situation. We have the so-called pacing. One approximates the behavior of the other person to subconsciously build a rapport. So, yung pacing na yon. Another one is the mental aikido. Mentally moving away from the focal point of adversary attack. Make a non-linear response to the adversary words. Shark expect you to react. Then the next tips is pattern interruption. Involves varying your usual response. You have the capacity to interrupt the usual destructiveness pattern by doing something completely different or unexpected. So that's the pattern interruption. Then, kanina that's one-to-one conflict. Now, group conflict, resolving group conflict naman tayo. So, in meeting conflict, if you sense a spoken or unspoken conflict in a meeting over an issue, address it. There seems to be one disagreement over this issue. Can we take a few minutes to clarify the issue? Then second, clarify the conflict. Okay, so there seems to be some disagreement over. So yan, mag-discussion naman kasi you're clarifying the conflict. Then decide if there is a time to deal with it today or if another meeting needs to be set up to give it full attention. Then since this seems to be quite an important issue, we don't have much time today, so let's agree to meet again to discuss it further. Can we meet on? So, depende na yan sa atin kung may kailangan pa talagang pag-usapan na mahalagang mga issues. Fourth, if another meeting is necessary, assign responsibility for gathering more information on the subject to staff. Then, so can you please, so may utusan ka, research information on kung ano yung issue. Then another na utusan mo, Diane, can you please check on the state mandate? Then fifth is insist employees or your subordinates, let it go until the next meeting. So we have a lot of other issues to discuss today. So let's free our minds of this issue until the set meeting and move on. So there are also group resolutions. First, restate the issue to ensure clarity. Then, have each group member share the information gathered and give his or her opinion. Then, third, make sure everything is put on the table. Then, no unresolved feelings popping up later. Fourth, brainstorm the alternatives. Fifth, agree on the best solution using team decision-making steps. Then, develop action steps. Then, agree on follow-up session. Then, beware of your own behavior. So, take note on this. Allowing aggressive or inappropriate conduct without taking action can foster a hostile or intimidating work environment. Kaya nga, be aware of our behavior. Decision-making without employee input or participation can lead to frustrated employees who don't feel valued as anything but worker bees. Parang sinasabi, nobody cares. Then your staff looks to you to assist in resolving conflict. You are better equipped to resolve conflict if both you and your staff have had conflict resolution training. So, ang ganda din. So, itong ating subject, this will help us also. And alam ko na sabi ko, mayroon na kayong mga experience. So, parang this is just an additional information. Then, if you are inconsistent or unpredictable, your employees will be unsure of your expectation and become frustrated. That the next engaging in a relationship with your employees that are personal or too informal may lead to misunderstandings as well as other employees feeling alienated. Then, look out for signs of discontentment. So, ito yung dapat tingnan din. A usually outgoing, communicative employee becomes withdrawn or quiet. Quiet. Tingnan niyo yan. Then, an employee frequently comes in a late for work. So, we are using employee, maybe your subordinate. Then, an employee is more argumentative or erratic than usual. Then, an employee suddenly takes no interest in maintaining his or her personal appearance or hygiene. So, yun dapat tingnan na. Look out for signs of discontentment, especially in your organization. Then, an employee or your subordinate makes comments about violent means of dealing with or coping with a particular situation. Then, an employee talks about having nothing to lose or not caring about anything anymore. So, we have to fast track. So, what about this conflict management? Another author by the name of Blake and Mouton in 1970 have proposed a scheme whereby we can try to avoid the win-loss situation and when possible, apply the win-win approach. So, ito yung palaging sinasabi natin. Then, the hands-off approach, or it's also called avoidance. Yung binalik ito kanina. Then, the accommodation is excessively personal-oriented. Then, we have also the so-called unilateral negotiation strategy that may include trusting collaboration strategy, open the subordination strategy, the firm competition strategy, then the active avoidance strategy. Then, in the interactive negotiation strategy, take note on this. Trusting collaboration, principled negotiation, firm competition, soft competition, open subordination, focus subordination, then active avoidance, passive avoidance, then responsive avoidance. Then another thing, according to Fisher at saka Urey and Payton, in 1991, they outlined 4 principles that compose the principled negotiation. First, separate the people from problem. Then, focus on interest, not position. Invent option for mutual gain. Seek objective criteria. So, notice, different author, different approach, different styles, different words they use, but they are more or less interrelated. It depends to the authors. So, we have to fast track on this. Then, to conclude, conflict management technique looks for win-win situation for both the parties. So, ito yung palagi kong sinasabi. Win-win dapat. Especially if you are the mediator, if you are the responder, if you are the initiator. Dapat win-win palagi in our mind. Not lose-lose, not win-lose, not lose-win, but the win-win. So, once again, win-win is coming from the 7 Habits of Effective People by Stephen Covey. So with that, I hope you learned something with this presentation. Then hopefully, later, mayroon na tayong time, magka-agree na kayo kung kailan tayo magkikita somewhere out there. Then we'll have parang a seminar type style in your reporting. So 8 man kayo, then hinati ko the other group 5 lang din, pero hindi ko kayo pinag-isa kasi iba ang situation ninyo. So ganun din gawin namin, we'll go outside sa malabig na lugar, then we have also a reporting which is also a seminar type. So thank you for listening. God bless you. Dalaygon ang Diyos.